As they were led away, the sisters felt the weight of the world's damp atmosphere settling upon them like a wet cloak. Earth was a fevered dream of competing hungers and lethal coincidences, yet it held a wild, unmanicured freedom that was unknown in the frozen halls of Aethelos. And in the vaults of their own hearts, they felt the stirrings of a strange, rhythmic ghost, a neurochemical madness known in this place as love. The room of questions was a white, airless box that smelled of fear and stale tobacco. Lara and Zira sat like icons of an extinct religion across from Briggs and a swarm of pale, scurrying scholars. The humans were relentless, their questions like the pecking of crows at a fallen star, unable to grasp the vast, crystalline geometry of the Aethelian soul. "Explain this to me again," Briggs said, his face a map of weary lines. "You were discarded like trash simply because you wished to think apart from the hive? That is the sum of it." Zira's hand moved, a slow, hypnotic wave across Lara's arm. "Our home is a single, blinding diamond. To be a flaw in that diamond is to be an enemy of the light. We chose to be flaws, and so we were cut away." The general leaned back, his chair groaning like a living thing, a sound of structural failure that Lara found strangely comforting. "So you are ghosts in high-tech shrouds. What is your intent for this world of ours?" The sisters looked at one another, their eyes meeting in a silent, dark communion. They had simulated this moment 1,000 times in the cold dark of the ship, but the answer remained a shadow. "The future is a blank wall," Zira whispered. "We are in the unmapped territory of our own lives. But if your directorate will grant us the air and the stone, we may find a way to coexist." The spacecraft was a splinter of obsidian, a sharp and predatory geometry that seemed less engineered than it was exhaled by a cold, mathematical nightmare. It drifted through the lightless gullet of the firmament, its facete hull absorbing the ancient, weary radiance of distant stars and refracting it in jagged, incomprehensible splinters of shadow. Within this hollow stone, 2 alien females sat in a silence so heavy it felt like a third occupant. Their heads, smooth as polished ivory and devoid of even the faintest ghostly down of hair, were inclined in an attitude of profound, ritualized despair. The light, such as it was, crawled over their architectural features, catching the sharp ridges of cheekbones that were like the parapets of some miniature, internal fortress. Lara and Zira were the dregs of a celestial purge. They had been cast out from Aethelos for the crime of heresy, the heresy of the self. The Aethelian Star-Aegis, a gargantuan, crumbling edifice of dogma dedicated to the freezing of all things into a singular, crystalline unity, had declared their yearning for individual breath to be a rot within the planetary spirit. They were now falling, with the slow, inevitable momentum of a dream, toward the damp, teeming mudbowl of Aeth, a place of squalor and unscripted chaos. "The irony is a poison in my throat," Lara whispered, her eyes igniting with a green, baleful fire that belonged to a landscape of eternal storms. "To be flung into this pit of brawling life simply because we dared to witness the cracks in their frozen god." Zira drew a long, rattling breath, her long fingers tracing the smooth dome of a skull with the obsessive rhythm of a rosary beaver. "We measured the darkness of our descent, sister, but we did not weigh the sheer, imaginative cruelty of the Aegis. They have granted us the mercy of the void, which is to say, they have forgotten us into existence elsewhere." Lara's reply was a sound like dry bone snapping, the Aethelian gesture for contempt that has moved beyond words. "Let them rot in their stillness. When the unity finally chokes on its own perfection, I shall be the wind that scatters their ashes." The descent was a cacophony of fire and friction, a violent baptism in the thick, suffocating air of the world below. The ship's skin bled white heat as it bartered its speed for survival in a spectacular trail of incandescent grief. Lara and Zira were crushed into their couches, their living garments tightening like the skins of drowning beasts to hold their frames together. The impact was a seismic shudder, a groaning of metal and earth as the craft carved a raw, bleeding wound into a meadow of tall, indifferent grass. Steam, thick and smelling of metal and ancient dust, billowed from the vents. As the great hatch groaned open upon its hinges, it revealed a parliament of apes. Humans, creatures of 1,000 twitching variations, dressed in rags of ego and vanity, stood frozen in a collective, gaping idiocy. Their minds, clogged with the minutiae of their brief lives, could not grasp this intrusion from the heights. The sisters stepped forth, their suits gleaming with metallic luminescence that made the terrestrial sun seem a dim and dusty lamp. They stood with a terrifying, vertical pride, statues of exile amidst the trembling fauna. The humans replied with a low, collective moaning and raised their glass and plastic talismans, desperate to trap the image of this miracle within their tiny, glowing boxes. Observation. These creatures do not see, Lara spat, her voice a rasping flute. They only seek to own the shadow of what they behold. Zira wore a mask of absolute, glacial stillness. We must become part of the masonry, Lara. To survive among the vermin, one must learn the geography of the shadows. A bipedal figure, swathed in a charcoal-colored shroud of stiff fabric, the uniform of some terrestrial ritual, extricated himself from the press. He was guarded by men bearing iron tubes that spat kinetic death. He moved with a jerky, apprehensive gait, a man walking upon a floor of thin glass. "Greetings," he croaked, his voice a dry rustle in the grass. "I am General Marcus Briggs, a keeper of the Global Defense Directorate. We offer a peace of sorts, if such a thing is understood among your kind." Lara's face was a study in marble-cold disdain, but Zira stepped forward, her body flowing into a gesture of serpentine, diplomatic grace. "I am Zira, and this is my sister Lara," she intoned, her voice possessing the resonant, haunting quality of a bell tolling in a submerged cathedral. "We are the cast-offs of a higher firmament, delivered to your doorstep by the hands of our executioners. Perhaps in this mud we shall find a new way to grow." Briggs blinked, his small, wet eyes darting as he struggled to digest the alien's terrifyingly perfect speech. He straightened his heavy coat, clinging to his titles like a beggar to a coin. "Quite. Yes. Earth welcomes you, after its own fashion. We have stone walls and protocols enough to house you. Follow the iron, and we shall see what can be bartered." Briggs nodded, his eyes reflecting a cold, bureaucratic hunger. "I am a node of the Global Defense Directorate. I deal in the currency of survival. We shall provide the cages and the bread, and you shall provide the mysteries." He rose, a heavy, funereal movement. "For now, you shall dwell in a fortress of concrete and iron. It lacks the polish of your stars, but it is solid." They moved through the bowels of the facility, a nightmare of reinforced gray and flickering, sickly light. Lara's senses were raw, searching for the hidden knives in the dark. Subvocalized. "The air here is thick with the scent of a trap," Lara hissed. "The walls have ears that bleed into the dark." Zira's brow was a knot of ancient thought. "True, but we are beggars in a world of thieves. We must wait for the moon to rise before we show our teeth." Their cell was a monument to the utilitarian grotesque. 2 slabs of iron, a bucket of porcelain, and nothing for the eye to rest upon. It was a cruel jest compared to the soaring, impossible spires of Aethelos. Lara fell upon the mattress, her breath a jagged sigh. A catastrophe of the spirit. She moaned, watching the dust motes dance in the sterile light. Exiled to a world of hair and hunger. Zira sat beside her, a pale shadow. "Look deeper, sister. It is a wilderness where no one watches a clock. It is a chance to see the universe without the filter of the Aegis." Lara snorted, the sound echoing like a ghost in the small room. "You would find a flower in a charnel house, Zira. But this place, it smells of endings." Zira sighed, her spirit sagging. "Perhaps. But the Aegis is far. Hey, the chaos is our only friend. We might find a new language in the silence." As they descended into the first night of their terrestrial life, the air felt charged with the electricity of a coming storm. They wondered if this was merely a slow death or the painful birth of something they could not yet name. The seasons crawled across the earth like sluggish, multicolored beasts. Lara and Zira dwelt in the heart of the human hive, drinking in the messy, vibrant history of primates. Lara found herself haunted by their music, a wild, sobbing dissonance of the heart that the Aegis had long ago silenced with cold logic. Zira found a strange beauty in their machines, clumsy, clanking things of iron and oil that worked by a kind of stubborn, desperate magic. Yet a hollow space remained within them, a thirst that no terrestrial water could slake. They were permitted at last to walk among the humans in their marketplace. It was a riot of entropy, a screaming, colorful grotto of smells and voices. The density of life was a physical weight. Amidst the swirling mass, Lara was arrested by a stole of silver trinkets, jewelry fashioned by hands that loved the metal they bruised. "Zira, look at the deformity of this ring," she whispered, touching the cool silver. "It is imperfect, and therefore it is alive." Zira's eyes traced the star pendant. The humans cherish the scar. They worship the broken edge. It is a philosophy of magnificent despair. The merchant, a creature of 1,000 wrinkles and eyes like dim, ancient coals, spoke to them without fear, as if he were addressing the wind. "You carry the silence of the moon in your pockets," he murmured, his voice like dry leaves. "But silver cannot warm a heart that is made of ice." Lara paused, her mind whirring like a clock. "Explain your riddle, old man." The merchant chuckled, a dusty sound. "Love, my child. It is the only fire that does not consume what it warms. It is the bridge between the lonely I and the vast, terrifying old Dut." Zira tilted her head, a bird-like movement. "Love? We are sisters. We are one. What more is there?" The man smiled, a weary and beautiful expression. "Sisterhood is the earth beneath your feet, but love, the love of the other, is the sky above your head. It is when two separate souls decide to inhabit the same dream. You will know it when your logic fails you." They departed the market, the man's words ringing in their minds like a bell in a fog. The emptiness within them seemed to grow, a cavernous hunger for a light they had never seen. They were not alone in their longing. In the shadows of their stone prison, two humans watched them with an intensity that bordered on the religious, their own spirits beginning to unravel in the presence of the alien grace. Sergeant Kaelen, Thorne, and Corporal Zane Rexus were the wardens of the sisters' exile. They had spent an eternity of hours watching Lara and Zira through the glass, and what began as duty had curdled into an obsessive, haunting fascination. Kaelen, a man of iron and silence, was possessed by Lara's fierce, emerald rage. He saw in her a warrior queen from a forgotten myth. Zane, a weaver of electronic webs, was mesmerized by Zira's crystalline mind. They were soldiers of the Global Defense Directorate, bound by the rigid laws of their caste, but the human heart is a rebel that knows no uniform. One evening, a sound of strife erupted from the sisters' quarters, a high, melodic wailing of two voices in conflict. The soldiers burst through the door, their weapons heavy in their hands. They found no enemy, only the two sisters locked in a tempest of Aethelian words, their faces masks of exquisite sorrow. "Report." Kaelen barked, his heart hammering against his ribs. Lara turned, her eyes two green suns. "Back, you hairless creature. This is the grief of Aethelos. It is not for your ears." But Zira stepped forward, her hands trembling. "No, Lara, the stone is too heavy. We cannot breathe in this silence any longer." She looked at Zane, her gaze like a physical touch. "We are drowning in ourselves. We need a voice that is not our own." Zane looked at Kaelen, and in that glance, the world of the Directorate died. They were no longer gods. They were men lost in the same woods. "We are listening," Kaelen said, lowering his iron. "Speak to us. Let the dark out." And so, in the dead of the night, the four of them sat in a circle of shadow and light. The sisters spoke of the frozen, beautiful horror of their home. The men spoke of the bloody, mud-stained glory of Earth. Kaelen and Zane felt their souls intertwining with the strangers. They recognized the same exile in the sisters that they felt in their own lives. Kaelen was drawn to Lara's fire, a flame that promised to burn away the boredom of his soul. Zane found the sister spirit in Zira, a mind that could see the patterns in the chaos. The walls of species and rank crumbled into dust, leaving only the raw, naked truth of four souls. "I have followed the drum all my life because I feared the silence," Kaelen confessed, his eyes fixed on Lara. "But looking at you, I see a war worth fighting. I want to be the ground you walk upon." Lara reached out, her fingers, cool as moonlight, brushing his scarred cheek. "I never dreamed that my fall from the stars would land me in such a garden, Kaelen." Zane and Zira were lost in a shared silence, their hands hovering near one another like moths near a flame. "Zira, the world is a broken machine," Zane whispered. "But you are the music in the gears. I want to run beside you." Zira smiled, a slow and radiant thing. "Then we shall craft a new world from the wreckage, Zane." It was a love born of shadow and exile, a monstrous and beautiful union that defied the very stars. But the stars were watching. Far across the void, the Aethelian Star-Aegis had felt the pulse of the anomaly. They saw this union as a blasphemy, a rot in the fabric of the unity. They dispatched a swarm of elite Aethelian hunters, creatures of glass and cold iron, designed for the extinction of the self. The command was absolute: purge the dissidents and the beast they had come to love. A tide of blood was rising. The blow fell with the suddenness of a lightning strike, a pulse of white light that turned the midnight world into a skeletal landscape of glare and shadow. Lara and Zira were instantly awake, their bodies responding to the ancient call to hunt. Kaelen and Zane burst in, their faces grim. "The sky is falling." Kaelen yelled, "The Star-Aegis has come for its due." The sisters looked at each other, and in that look was the end of their childhood. They were no longer exiles, they were defenders. "We shall not be moved," Zira said, her voice a low, funeral drum. "This earth is ours now." Lara's chute flared with a predatory light. "We fight for the floors." They stepped into the night, and it was a carnival of slaughter. The streets were filled with the shimmering, lethal shapes of Aethelian hunters. Lara and Zira moved like dark water, their movements a lethal poetry, while Kaelen and Zane fought with the desperate, jagged ferocity of the human animal. They were a nightmare of hybrid war, precision and passion, ice and fire. Each act was a vow, each shot a prayer. "Kaelen, the shadow behind you!" Lara shrieked, her body a blur as she intercepted a blade of light meant for his throat. Kaelen fired into the dark, his breath a ragged sob. "I owe you a life, Lara. I'll pay it in blood if I must." Lara's laughter was a wild, bird-like cry. "Pay it in love, human. The blood is free." Across the square, Zane and Zira were a single, dual-headed beast of war. Zira tore through the Aethelian mines while Zane shattered their glass carapaces. "Zira, I'm holding the flank. Strike now." Zane screamed, his hands stained with oil and earth. Zira unleashed a storm of kinetic energy that ground the hunters into dust. "The unity is broken here, Zane. We are the new law." "Forever," Zane cried, his heart bursting with a terrible joy. They were a small, brave knot of life in a forest of death. But they were fueled by a fire the hunters could not understand. They broke the Aethelian wave, and as the human directorate joined fray, the invaders were cast back into the night. When the fire died, the square was a graveyard of crystal and iron. They stood together, gasping for air, their bodies broken but their spirits soaring. They had survived the god of their youth. The hunters fled into the void, leaving behind only the silence of the dead. Lara and Zira stood among the ruins, the first light of a new dawn catching the tears upon their ivory cheeks. Kaelen and Zane moved to them, their heavy boots crunching on the glass. They took the sisters in their arms, and the world was still. "It is done," Kaelen whispered, his voice a ghost. "We are free." Lara looked at the rising sun, her green eyes wide and beautiful. "No, Kaelen, we are begun." And as the light washed over the broken city, it felt like the first morning of the world. They had survived the stars and found a place in the mud. They had found each other. Many years turned their heavy wheels, and the story of the four became a legend whispered in the halls of a new world. They became the architect of a house that held both the star and the earth. They stood now upon a high, crumbling parapet, watching the lights of their city twinkle like fallen stars in the valley below. "I once thought the sky was my home," Lara said, her voice a soft rustle of silk. "But I found it here, in the curve of your arm." Kaelen pulled her close, his gray hair catching the moonlight. "Home is not a place, Lara. It is a heart that knows your name." Zira and Zane stood together, their minds still entwined in a dance of light and shadow. "We have written a new book," Zira whispered, "a book with no ending." Zane kissed her hand, his eyes reflecting the vast, beautiful chaos of the night. "And we shall read it together, Zira, page by page." As the moon rose high over the world, they stood as a single, indivisible monument to the power of the floor. They were the exiles who had found a kingdom, the broken who had found a whole. And nothing in the heavens or the earth could ever dim the light of the love they had forged in the dark.